The deed struck the flagstones at Hester Quill's feet with a sound like a slap, and the Earl of Marrow said, in a voice gone perfectly level, that the inn was hers to keep or to starve in, whichever she preferred. She did not pick it up at once. She would remember, long afterward, counting 3 breaths before she bent for it, and in later years she could never quite say whether she had been proud in that moment, or merely too stunned to move. The household had gathered in the great hall to watch, as households always gather for a fool, and not one of the 40 faces ringed about her held anything so honest as pity. 6 weeks, Julian Ashworth had said, 6 weeks until the Michaelmas Quarter Sessions, when Sir Robert Aldous' bench reviewed every innkeeper's licence strung along the turnpike road, and any house found shut fast on that morning lost its sign for good and all. She did not yet know that the ledger her father had died defending was still in the world, waiting for her hand to find it. Had she known, she would have knelt for the deed all the same, and with less trembling. The page that had undone her lay upon the steward's table, where Edmund Rooke had set it down so gently, so regretfully, that 3 housemaids had wept before Hester herself had said a word. It was a page of figures in a hand, very like her father's, showing sums of the estate's corn money diverted over 11 months into an account bearing the initials HQ. Hester had looked at it for the length of 10 heartbeats and known 2 things at once, that she had never written it, and that no one in that hall would believe her if she said so. "I did not do this," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had trained it for 5 years not to. Julian did not look at her when he answered. He looked instead at the page, as though it were the page that had betrayed him, and not the woman standing before it. "My father took your father's word over 4 separate accountants, Miss Quill, because he loved him," he said. "I have extended the same courtesy to you for 5 years, because I believed I owed it. I find I was wrong on both counts." "Then ask Mr. Rooke where he had this page," Hester said. "Ask him whose hand truly wrote it." Edmund Rooke did not raise his voice. He never needed to. He merely spread his clean hands, palms up, the picture of a man grieved past speech, and said that he had found it among the corn accounts that very morning, and that it had cost him more than she could know to bring it to his cousin rather than simply burn it and spare her the shame. "You are generous," Julian said to him, and something in his jaw moved, once, like a man taking a blow and refusing to let his face report it. Then he turned back to Hester and named the inn. "The Stag and Lantern," he said, had stood empty at the Fembridge crossroads for the better part of a year, its tap-rooms shuttered, its stables full of nothing but old straw and worse debts, its sign hanging crooked on one hinge. It belonged to the estate outright, unencumbered by the entail, which meant he could give it away as easily as a man tosses a coin to a beggar and walks on. "Take it," he said. "It will cost you everything, and it will cost me nothing to lose." That is, I think, a fair trade for 5 years of my father's charity. Mrs. Prudence Yarrow, who had kept the hall's kitchens since before Hester was born, made a small sound in her throat that was not quite a word, and was ignored by everyone but Hester, who heard it and held to it the way a woman holds to a rail on a dark stair. Hester bent, at last, and took up the deed. The paper was warm from the flagstones and cold from what it meant. "Thank you, my lord," she said, "for making certain I understand exactly what I am worth to you." She did not wait for an answer. She walked the length of the hall with her chin level and her hands steady, and only Mrs. Yarrow, following 2 steps behind with a shawl she had not been asked to bring, saw that her steady hands were white-knuckled around a folded, worthless piece of paper, as though it were the last solid thing left in the world. The road to Fembridge ran 4 miles through fields going golden dry under a August that pressed on the county like a hand laid flat. Lapwings wheeled and cried over the stubble the whole way, the same thin, falling note over and over, and Hester found herself listening to it, because it was easier than listening to anything in her own head. The Stag and Lantern stood at the crossroads exactly as promised, shutters swollen shut, its painted sign faded to a ghost of a stag beneath a ghost of a lantern, its yard gone to nettles up past the mounting block. She let herself in through a warped side door, with a key that stuck twice before it turned. Inside, the taproom smelled of mice and cold hearth ash, and underneath both, faintly, of beeswax, as though someone long ago had cared for the wood and stopped only when there was no more reason to. She crossed to the great cold hearth and knelt before it out of some instinct she did not examine, and it was there, working her fingers along the hearthstone's edge where the mortar had crumbled soft, that she found the loose stone, and beneath the loose stone, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, a single tally stick notched in a pattern she would have known blindfolded, because it was her father's hand upon it, and her father had been dead 5 years. She sat back on her heels in the dust and the failing light, and did not weep. Anger would have been easier, and easier still would have been despair, but what came instead was a kind of terrible, steadying clarity. The sense of a door she had not known was shut quietly coming open. Somewhere out past the broken shutters, the lapwings were still crying over the crossroads fields, and quarter sessions was 6 weeks away, and she was, for the first time in 5 years, entirely her own mistress of a house that owed nothing to anyone's charity. She did not sleep that first night so much as keep vigil, moving room to room by rushlight, with a broom in one hand, and her father's tally stick in the apron pocket against her hip, and by the time grey light came up over the crossroads, she had catalogued every failure of the house, the way another woman might catalogue jewels. The roof wanted mending over the north gable. 2 of the 4 chimneys drew badly. The stable held 1 lame horse, forgotten by whoever had shut the place up, and a quantity of harness gone stiff with neglect, that could, with oil and patience, still be saved. She was elbow-deep in a stable ledger, gone soft with damp, when a cart rattled into the yard, and Mrs. Yarrow climbed down from it with a hamper, a rolled feather bed, and the settled expression of a woman who has made up her mind and does not intend to discuss it. "I gave my notice, Mrs.," Yarrow said, before Hester could speak. "Told her ladyship I'd rather boil turnips for a fool with sense than roast beef for a household with none. She didn't care for the phrasing. You'll starve here as easily as I will." Hester said, "I've starved on worse wages for less reason," said Mrs. Yarrow, and set the hamper down with a thump that ended the argument. She was a broad, plain-spoken woman, with forearms like a blacksmith's and a tongue she had never once in 30 years' service learned to govern, and she looked now about the ruined tap-room the way a general looks at ground he intends to hold. "Well," she said, "it wants scrubbing before it wants anything else. Grief keeps better on a clean floor." They scrubbed. It was, Hester thought, watching lye water run black across the flags, the first honest work she had done in 5 years that was entirely her own, owed to no one, answerable to no steward's ledger, but the one she meant to keep herself. She told Mrs. Yarrow, over bread and hard cheese at midday, the whole of what her father had taught her before the fire took him, that a house's books were its conscience, that every farthing left an honest mark if a person had eyes to read it, that a ledger does not lie, only the hand that holds the pen. He used to say that to me over the corn accounts, Hester said. A ledger does not lie, only the hand that holds the pen. I thought it was a game, when I was a girl. I did not understand until much later that he meant it as a warning. Warning of what? That someone's hand was already lying, even then. It was on the third afternoon that Julian came. She heard the horse before she saw him, and had time only to straighten her apron and will her face into stillness before he was in the yard, dismounting with the same economical grace he did everything, tying his own reins because there was no groom left to take them. He looked, she thought, like a man arriving somewhere he had decided beforehand to regret. I did not expect visitors, Hester said. I am not a visitor. The estate held the mortgage on this property until yesterday's transfer was witnessed, and I find I am obliged, as a point of law, to confirm the property was delivered in the condition described. Then confirm it, my lord, and be on your way. He did not go. He stood in the swept yard with his hat under his arm, and looked at the mended shutter she had rehung that morning, and at the harness oiled and coiled neat on its pegs through the open stable door, and something crossed his face that was not quite surprise and not quite shame. You have been busy, he said. I have had 6 weeks to be busy in, and 3 of them are already spent. You blame me for the deadline. I blame you for a great many things, my lord. The deadline is merely the one I can do something about. He almost smiled at that. She saw it start at the corner of his mouth and be recalled, like a soldier stepping back into rank. My father trusted your father with every farthing this estate ever earned, he said, and I have spent 5 years telling myself I owed his daughter the same trust on inheritance alone. I find that trust is not, after all, a thing one inherits. No, Hester agreed. It is a thing one earns, or is robbed of by a liar clever enough to make the theft look like someone else's hand. You did not ask who benefited from that page appearing exactly when it did, my lord. You only asked who it named. His eyes came up to hers then, grey and unreadable, and for one unguarded second, uncertain. Who would benefit, he said slowly, from ruining a woman with no money and no power to fight back? That, said Hester, is precisely the question I intend to answer before quarter sessions. He left without another word, but he left slowly, and twice at the crossroads he reined in and looked back at the crooked sign as though it had said something to him he had not quite caught. Mrs. Yarrow, watching from the doorway with her arms folded, said only, "That one's not as rid of you as he'd like to be," and went back inside to see about the bread. Edmund Rooke came to the Stag and Lantern on the 5th day, riding a bay mare too fine for a steward's wages, dressed in linen so white it seemed to refuse the road's dust as a matter of principle. He smelled, when he bent over Hester's hand in the yard, of orange flower water, a scent so immaculate it seemed itself a kind of armour. "My dear Miss Quill," he said, "I could not rest until I had seen for myself how you fared." "You may rest now, Mr. Rooke. I fare very well." "You fare bravely, which is not the same thing, and braver still than the ledger's warrant, I fear." He drew a folded paper from his breast pocket, with the unhurried care of a man who enjoys being watched perform a kindness. "I have taken the liberty of having the old accounts drawn up fresh, so that you might see precisely what you have inherited. It grieves me to say it is worse than even I believed. £400 owed to the maltster alone. The Turnpike Trust's toll contract lapsed at Lady Day and was not renewed. I would not have you labour under false hope, cousins Ward, when a plain truth now might spare you a broken heart come Michaelmas. He said it all so gently, so regretfully, that a lesser woman might have thanked him for the wound. Hester took the paper, read it once, and set it down upon the mounting block without the smallest tremor in her hand. You are very thorough, Miss Rook. I have always tried to be of use where I am able. Then be of use now, and tell me who has been buying grain at this address on the estate's account these 11 months past, when the house has stood shuttered and taken no custom at all. For the first time, something in his composure paused, no longer than the space between 2 heartbeats, and then smoothed over so completely she might have imagined it, save that she did not imagine things of that sort. A clerical error, surely, he said. I shall have it looked into. Do, said Hester, and I shall look into it also, so that we need not trouble each other twice. He bowed over her hand again, murmured something courteous about her fortitude doing her father credit, and rode away at an unhurried walk, and it was only once his mare had cleared the crossroads that Hester allowed herself to breathe out slowly through her teeth. Mrs. Yarrow, who had stood the whole interview in the doorway with a rolling pin held like a weapon she had not quite decided to use, said, "That's a man who's never once in his life told the truth for its own sake." "No," Hester said, "but he told me something true just now without meaning to. Someone has been ordering grain delivered here, to an empty house, for 11 months, and paying for it out of the estate's own purse. That evening, going through the ruined counting room behind the tap room by candlelight, she found the grain receipts wedged behind a warped drawer, dated across nearly a year, each one signed with an initial that was not her father's, and not her own, a single looping E that she copied onto a scrap of paper and pinned above her makeshift desk, like a physician pins a symptom he does not yet dare to name a disease. Word of her arrival had, by then, run the length of Fembridge village the way water runs downhill. The blacksmith's boy reported that the book at the Green Man had 3 separate wagers laid on how many weeks the Earl's cast-off ward would last before she sold the place for scrap timber and went to be a governess somewhere quiet. The vicar's wife called, ostensibly with soup, actually to see the ruin for herself and report on it after evensong. A drover who had once stopped nightly at the Stag and Lantern before it shut, and had gone 6 miles out of his way to the Green Man ever since, put his head in at the tap-room door out of simple curiosity, and stayed to drink 2 pots of Mrs. Yarrow's small beer, pronounced it the best he'd had this side of Lady Day, and promised, half in jest, to bring his mate's waggon by if the roof still held come Thursday. "That," said Mrs. Yarrow, watching his cart rattle off toward the crossroads, "is your first honest customer, and he came for nothing grander than good beer and a dry roof. Remember it. It's cheaper than any amount of clever." Hester did remember it. She wrote it, in fact at the top of a fresh page, in a new ledger she had begun that very night, the first entry of a book that would, in 6 short weeks, come to hold the busiest accounts on the whole Fembridge road. The work went on by daylight, and often past it, and it was in the working that something between Hester and Julian began, without either of them quite naming it, to change. He came back the following week, on the estate's stated business of confirming the transfer's terms, and stayed to mend a hinge, because his hands, he said shortly, would otherwise be idle while he waited on her signature, and idle hands vexed him more than labour ever had. He came again 3 days after that, with no pretext offered at all. By the 2nd week of Hester's tenancy he was arriving most evenings, as the light went long and gold across the stable roof, and the household, such as it was, herself and Mrs. Yarrow, and by then a lamed old ostler named Davy Combe, who had drifted back to his former post the way old dogs return to old doors, had simply stopped remarking on it. One such evening found the two of them bent together over the counting-room table, Julian's sleeves turned back to the elbow, his ledger hand surprisingly quick and clean for a man who had never in his life needed to keep his own accounts. "Your father taught you a very particular method," he said, watching her thumb travel down a column of figures, without once losing its place, column by column, never line by line. Faster and less prone to error, if a person has the trick of it. He taught me everything he knew before I was 12, because he said a quill ought never depend on another soul's arithmetic. I did not understand then that he meant it as more than good advice. What did he mean it as? "I think," Hester said slowly, setting down her pen, "that he already suspected someone was tampering with the estate's true accounts, and meant for me to be able to catch it, if ever it came to that. I did not understand it until this house came into my hands and I found his marks hidden in the hearth." She had not meant to say that much. She watched him absorb it, watched the grey eyes go very still and very careful, and braced for the old suspicion to return to his face. It did not. "Show me," he said instead. She did, and for a long while there was no sound in the counting-room but the scratch of 2 pens and the settling of the old house around them, comfortable rather than eerie for the first time since she had come. It was Julian, unexpectedly, who broke the silence with something very near a laugh, a short, surprised huff of breath at a marginal note in her father's crabbed hand, a dry little joke about a maltster's honesty scrawled sideways beside a column of figures 20 years old. Hester looked up so quickly he noticed, and colour came into her face before she could govern it. "You've never laughed in my hearing in 5 years," she said. "I was not aware I had stopped doing it entirely. You had. I marked the day, if you want to know. It was the winter your brother's memorial stone was set. I remember thinking you had put your laughter away in the same ground." He did not answer that at once. When he did, his voice had lost its customary evenness, gone rougher, quieter. "My brother taught me to sail a skiff on the mere behind the hall," he said. "He was drowned in it, the same water, the summer I turned 21. I have found since that grief is easier to carry if a man keeps himself very still and very careful, and does not permit himself much of anything, laughter included, that might shake the load loose. That sounds," Hester said gently, "like a very heavy way to live." "It has been," he admitted, and there was a long pause in which neither of them moved to fill the silence, and something passed between them that was not quite confession and not quite forgiveness, but stood very close to both. She did not tell him, that night, the whole of what she suspected of Edmund Rooke. She told herself it was because she had no proof fit to be spoken aloud, no more than grain receipts, and a stranger's initial, and a father's tally stick pulled from a hearth. The truer reason, which she did not examine too closely by candlelight, was that she was not yet certain whether Julian's newly recovered gentleness toward her would survive an accusation against his own blood, and she found, to her considerable annoyance, that she had begun to care rather more than was prudent whether it did. The blow, when it came, arrived dressed as good news, which was, Hester would come to understand, exactly how Edmund Rooke preferred his poison served. By the 4th week the Stag and Lanterns tap-room was, against every prediction laid in the Green Man's wager book, half full most evenings and entirely full on market days, its stable holding 4 horses where it had lately held none. its chimneys drawing clean, its roof sound over the north gable at last. Hester had done it on almost nothing. Good beer honestly poured, clean linen, fair prices chalked plain on a board where every carter could read them for himself, and a standing rule, posted at Mrs. Yarrow's insistence, that no man's coat or purse determined the warmth of his welcome. Word of the turnaround reached Marrow Hall inevitably, as word of everything did, and it was Edmund Rooke who carried it to his cousin, wrapped in exactly the tone of a man reluctantly performing his duty. 4 horses stabled, a full tap-room, a mended roof, all inside a month, cousin, on a house that could not meet its maltster's bill in a 12-month of honest trying, he said. I do not say it to malign her. I say only that a man ought to ask where such sudden fortune comes from, when the woman spending it arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a father's reputation already once in question. Julian's face, when he rode to the crossroads that evening, wore an expression Hester had thought put away for good. 4 horses in a month, he said, without preamble, standing in the swept yard as though the ground itself had grown unfamiliar to him. New linen. A roof mended in oak, not thatch. Where does the money come from, Hester? From the till, my lord, a shilling at a time, the way honest money always comes. That is not an answer that satisfies a man who has twice now been shown a page in your father's hand, explaining a theft that never was. The unfairness of it struck her like cold water. You would ask me to account for every farthing I have honestly earned, on the word of the very man who forged the page that ruined my father's name, and mine besides. I would ask you, Julian said, and his voice had gone hard in the old remembered way, not to make me choose between the evidence set plainly in front of me, and a fondness I have not yet decided is wisdom. Then choose the evidence, Hester said, and be quick about it, my lord, for I have a tap-room to see fed, and no more time to spend proving my honesty to a man who keeps deciding it fresh each week. He left without answering, and this time he did not look back at the crossroads sign. Hester stood in the yard until the sound of his horse had gone entirely, and then went inside and sat very still at her father's counting table, with her hands folded before her, not weeping. Because weeping would have been easier, and she had never learned the trick of easier. It was not anger she felt, sitting there in the fading light. Anger would have passed by morning. What she felt instead was the older, colder recognition that her own gift, the very competence that had saved this house, had been turned in Rooke's hands into the second rope to hang her with, exactly as it had once been done to her father, and that the pattern of it, the softly delivered evidence, the reluctant duty, the perfectly timed page, was not chance twice repeated, but a method, practised and precise, belonging to one man alone. She took her father's tally stick from her apron pocket and turned it over in her fingers in the dark, and found that her hand, for once, was not entirely steady after all. Edmund Rooke returned to the Stag and Lantern 2 mornings later, alone, and found Hester in the stable-yard with flour to her elbows from helping Mrs. Yarrow bake for the market crowd, and he looked, she thought, exactly like a man who believed the ground beneath her had finally gone soft enough to swallow her. I confess I did not come merely to admire your industry, he said, after the usual courtesies. I have had a conversation with my cousin that troubles me greatly on your behalf. He speaks of withdrawing the deed's confirmation before quarter sessions, on grounds of irregular income. I should hate to see it come to that for your sake, and for the sake of your father's memory, which has suffered enough at the county's tongue already. How generous you continue to be with my father's memory, Mr. Rooke. I would spare you further grief, that is all. I have, in fact, come to make you an offer, one I hope you will consider in the spirit it is meant. I will purchase this property from you myself, this week, at a fair price, fair, mind, not generous, for I am a man of business, and not a fool, but fair, and settle the sum on you free and clear, so that you might remove yourself somewhere quieter, somewhere your name need not be spoken alongside talk of theft and forged accounts at every market day henceforward. I ask in return only that you cease this digging you have lately taken up into old grain receipts and older ledgers. Some graves, Miss Quill, are better left unturned, for the comfort of the living as much as the dead. There it was, laid out so smoothly she almost missed the shape of the trap beneath the velvet of it, money enough to live free of scandal, offered on the single condition that she stop searching for the truth that would clear her father's name and expose the hand that had wronged them both. She let the silence stretch long enough that he began, for the first time, to look faintly uncertain of his ground. "You are offering me my freedom," she said at last, "in exchange for my father's honour. I find I cannot spend one without the other, Miss Rook, and so I must decline. You would refuse a fair sum, and security, and peace, for the sake of a dead man's reputation that troubles no one living but yourself. It troubles you a great deal, I think, or you would not have ridden 4 miles to buy my silence over it." His composure did not crack, not quite, but something behind his eyes went flat, and calculating in a way the practised warmth of his voice could not quite disguise. "You will regret this refusal," he said gently, as though delivering a kindness rather than a threat. "I have regretted a great many things, Mr. Rook. I find I regret cowardice rather more than poverty, on the whole, and so I shall keep both my ledgers and my hunger a while longer." He rode away without another word, and Hester stood in the yard with flour drying stiff on her forearms, and her heart going hard and fast beneath her stays, and understood that she had just refused the only easy road out of this that she was ever likely to be offered, and that whatever came now would come at the full cost of her defiance. Mrs. Yarrow, arriving at her elbow with a cloth to wipe the flour away, had heard enough through the open kitchen window to need no explanation. "Well," she said, "you've made your bed hard, and no mistake. I could not lie in a soft one bought with my father's name." "No, Mrs." Yarrow agreed, and there was something fierce and proud beneath the bluntness of it. "You never could. Your father was exactly the same sort of fool, God keep him, and I loved him for it same as I'll love you." That night, lying awake, and listening to the wind pick up over the crossroads fields, Hester found she did not regret the refusal, not truly, whatever it might yet cost her. She thought, instead of the tally stick hidden in her apron, and of the loose stone in the hearth where she had found it, and of her father's voice saying that a ledger does not lie, and she began for the first time to wonder in earnest what else that hearth, or others like it, might still be keeping safe. The blow fell 3 nights later, and it fell in the shape of 6 men in the brown coats of the excise, arriving at the Stag and Lantern's door past dark, with a warrant sworn out on information laid that the house was selling ale short of measure and wine, adulterated with water, and behind them, unnamed on the warrant but present all the same, rode Edmund Rook, watching from the crossroads with the stillness of a man overseeing work he had ordered done. Davy Combe, when the excise officers turned to him for the tapster's word, would not meet Hester's eyes, and his hand went twice to scratch behind his ear before he answered them. A small nervous habit she had noticed before, without understanding, and now understood entirely. "I only measured as I was told to measure," he muttered, and would say no more, and the officers, finding the evidence of his own admission enough to satisfy their warrant, posted a notice upon the door forbidding the house to sell so much as a pint until the matter was heard before the bench. It was. Hester understood with cold clarity as she watched the paper nailed to her own front door. Precisely timed, 10 days before quarter sessions, calculated to see her licence lapsed and her customs scattered before the licence bench ever sat to hear her case at all. She did not sleep. She sat instead in the dark tap-room long after the excisemen and rook alike had ridden away, and it was there, near midnight, that Mrs. Yarrow found her and set down beside her, without a word, a letter that had come by a carrier's boy too late in the day's confusion to be noticed until now. It bore no seal she recognised, and inside, in a careful, unpractised hand, was a note from a woman named Sarah Pratt, once housemaid at the old counting-house at Marrow Hall, now married and removed to the next parish, who had heard from her sister of Hester's troubles, and wished her to know one thing she had carried silently for 5 years out of fear of losing her place, that on the night of the counting-house fire she had seen Mr. Edmund Rooke leaving by the side door not an hour before the flames were first cried, carrying a lantern he had no earthly business carrying, and had said nothing then, because who would have believed a housemaid's word against a gentleman's, and because Thomas Quill was already dead, and could no longer be helped by the telling. Hester read it twice by rushlight, and then a third time, and found that her hands, which had stayed steady through the deed, through Julian's coldness, through Rooke's bribe and the excisemen's warrant both, were shaking now at last, not with grief but with something fiercer and colder that had no other name but the beginning of certainty. He set the fire, she said aloud, to Mrs. Yarrow, to the dark room, to no one. He set the fire that killed my father, to burn the true accounts before anyone could read them, and let the county believe my father a thief to cover the theft that was always his own. It would explain a great deal, Mrs., Yarrow said quietly, including why he spent 5 years so anxious to be kind to the daughter of a man he murdered. The words sat heavy and enormous in the small dark room. Hester turned the tally stick over once more in her fingers, and thought of the loose hearthstone where she had found it, and of her father's insistence, all her childhood, that a shadow ledger existed somewhere separate from the estate's official books, kept as insurance against exactly such a hand as Rooke's. If such a book had survived the fire at all, it would not have survived at the counting-house, which had burned to its foundation. It would have survived, if it survived anywhere, in the one other place her father had trusted absolutely. This house. This hearth, this inn he had helped choose as a boy, for the estate's own use, long before Hester was born. She looked at the great cold hearth across the ruined tap-room, at the loose stone she had already found once, and asked herself, with her heart beating very hard against her ribs, what else her father might have hidden where only a quill would think to look, and whether she had 10 days remaining to find it, or none at all. She found it on the 4th night of searching, not in the loose hearthstone, which held nothing further, but in the chimney breast above it, behind a course of brick her father had once rebuilt the summer before his death on the pretext of a smoking flue. A pretext Hester now understood for exactly what it had been. Behind the brick, wrapped thrice in oiled canvas and sealed with wax gone brittle as old honey, lay a second ledger in her father's unmistakable hand, its pages recording, month by careful month for nearly 3 years, the true takings of every property under Edmund Rooke's management set beside the false sums Rooke had entered in the estate's official books. The difference between the 2 columns totalling, by the final page, very close to £1,100 diverted quietly into Rook's own keeping. On the last leaf, in ink gone brown but still entirely legible, her father had written a single line dated the week before the fire. "Should anything befall me before this reaches the Earl's own hand, let it be known I go to my death an honest man, robbed of nothing but the chance to say so." Hester read it once through the whole night by candlelight, and did not weep even then, though she came, Mrs. Yarrow said afterward, nearer to it than she had come in 5 years. By morning she had made her plan entire, and by midday she had ridden to Marrow Hall herself, for the first time since the deed had struck the flagstones, and asked to see Julian, and been kept waiting in the very hall where she had once picked up her own ruin, until he came to her at last with the wary, unhappy look of a man uncertain which version of the world he was about to be handed. "I have found my father's true ledger," she said, without preamble, and set it on the table between them, "and it does not merely clear his name, my lord, it clears mine, and it names the man who has been robbing your estate for 3 years, and let an innocent man burn to hide it." She watched every colour leave his face as he read, page by page, the whole slow architecture of his cousin's theft laid bare in a dead man's honest hand, and watched something older and harder than shock settle behind his eyes once he reached the final line. "He let me believe your father a thief," Julian said very quietly, "for 5 years. He let me throw a deed at your feet and call it charity. He did worse than that, my lord. Sarah Pratt saw him leaving the counting-house with a lantern the night it burned." Julian was silent a long while, his hand resting flat upon the open ledger, as though he might, by pressure alone, hold its truth down and keep it from escaping into a world not yet ready to hear it. "Quarter session sits in 6 days," he said at last. "Sir Robert Aldous presides. If we bring this before the bench, publicly, with witnesses sworn, it will ruin him entirely, and there will be no mending it after." "I do not wish to mend it," Hester said. "I wish it known, before every witness the county can gather, exactly whose hand truly lied." He looked at her then with something she had not seen in his face in all the 5 years she had known him, a kind of open, unguarded respect that asked no forgiveness and offered none, only recognition, one competent hand meeting another across a table stained with old ink and older grief. "Then we will need Davy Combe to speak the truth of the excise warrant," he said slowly, thinking it through even as he spoke it, and Mr. Pruitt's dealings looked into. "For I have long suspected my cousin does not act entirely alone in his purchases, and the Turnpike Trust's own minutes examined. For a man does not ruin a coaching inn on a whim, not when the crossroads route is soon to be confirmed, and every rod of ground along it about to triple in worth." "You knew of the route?" "I have only just begun to understand what I did not know," Julian said, "and how much of it I ought to have asked 5 years ago, when it would have cost your father nothing to answer me the truth." They spent the 6 days that remained building the case the way a mason builds a wall, one stone set true against the next, until the whole would bear weight. Julian rode to the Turnpike Trust's clerk himself, and returned with the minutes proving the crossroads route had been all but settled a full year past, known to perhaps 4 men in the county, one of them Edmund Rook, who sat on the Trust's advisory committee by virtue of his cousin's name, and had said nothing of it to anyone at Marrow Hall at all. Mr. Josiah Pruitt, the attorney whose name appeared twice in Thomas Quill's shadow ledger as receiver of quiet payments, proved, upon a visit from Julian's own solicitor, considerably less loyal to Rook than Rook had evidently believed, and produced, in exchange for his own protection from the coming storm, a set of letters in Rook's hand, instructing him to acquire the Stag and Lantern through an intermediary the moment its licence lapsed, at a price no honest man would call fair. Davy Combe took longer, and it was Hester herself, not Julian, who finally reached him, finding him alone in the stable on the 5th evening oiling harness with more care than the task required, his hand going again and again to scratch behind his ear. "You did not lie for love of the money, I think," she said, sitting on an upturned bucket near enough to speak low. "I've 6 children and a wife with a bad chest, Miss Quill. He paid better than fair, and he said the warrant was only ever meant to close the house a fortnight, not to ruin you outright. And now? Now I've watched you scrub this place with your own 2 hands, and pay me honest wages I didn't ask twice for, and I find I can't sleep of a night for what I've helped do to you." His voice, when it finally broke entirely, and he told her the whole of it, the false measures sworn to the excise, the £2 paid quiet for his silence, the standing instruction from Rook to report anything of note in the Marrow Hall grain accounts he happened across in his old post at the Hall stables, going back nearly 2 years before Hester had ever set foot in this house. "Will you swear it before the bench?" Hester asked him, and Davy Combe, who had spent 5 days not sleeping for the weight of what he already knew, said yes before she had finished asking, in a voice gone raw with relief at being asked at all. Edmund Rook, meanwhile, seemed to feel the ground shifting beneath him, without yet knowing precisely how or why, and came once more to the crossroads on the evening before quarter sessions, his composure, for the first time in Hester's acquaintance with him, not entirely whole. He did not dismount. "You will find," he said from the saddle, in a voice that had lost some of its practised gentleness, "that the county is slower to believe a poor relation's word than you seem to have persuaded yourself. I do not intend to offer them my word alone, Mr. Rook. I intend to offer them my father's." Something flickered across his face at that, quick and involuntary, gone almost before Hester could name it, not anger, but something nearer fear, the first honest thing she had ever seen him show. "Your father," he said, "should have learned, as I did, that the world does not reward an honest hand. It only ever rewards the hand quick enough to take what it needs before someone quicker takes it first." He learned instead, Hester said quietly, that a man might die poor and still die honest, and that the second thing outlasts the first. "I think, Mr. Rook, that is the one lesson you have never managed to learn at all." He said nothing further. He turned his mare and rode back toward Marrow Hall in the falling dark, and Hester watched him go with the tally stick pressed hard into her palm, and knew with a certainty that settled over her like the last cool evening after a long pressing summer, that tomorrow would settle, one way or another, every debt this crossroads had been keeping for 5 long years. Quarter sessions convened in the long room above the Fembridge Market Hall, on a morning scrubbed clean by a storm that had broken hard in the night and passed before dawn, leaving the air washed and sharp, and the crossroads mud churned deep with the wheels of every cart and gig the county could muster to come and watch. Sir Robert Aldous sat the bench with 2 fellow magistrates flanking him, a spare, grey, unhurried man, known the length of the turnpike for asking exactly one more question than any witness wished to answer. The room was packed to its rafters, the drover who had brought his first honest custom, the vicar's wife who had come with soup and stayed for gossip, half the Green Man's wagering book turned out in person to see how their bets would settle, and, seated near the front with his cousin at his side, Edmund Rook, immaculate as ever in linen too fine for the weather, his composure rebuilt overnight into something almost convincing. Hester rose when her turn came and set upon the clerk's table 3 things in order: her father's shadow ledger, the grain receipts bearing the single looping initial E, and last, the bundle of Rook's own letters to Mr. Prewitt, procured under Julian's solicitor's careful persuasion. "This house," she said, and her voice carried the length of the packed room without once needing to rise, was called Bankrupt by the very man who bankrupted it, so that he might buy it cheap, before its true worth was known to any but himself. I do not ask the bench to take my word for that. I ask only that it read my father's hand, which has never yet been proven a liar, set beside Mr. Rook's, which I believe the bench will find has lied a great deal indeed. Sir Robert took the ledger himself, turned its pages slowly, and read aloud, in the flat, unhurried voice of a man who has learned that the truth needs no ornament. 3 entries where Rook's official accounts showed losses, and Thomas Quill's private ledger, dated the self-same weeks, showed healthy profit quietly diverted elsewhere. A murmur ran the room like wind through standing corn. "And the fire that killed the man who kept this book," Sir Robert said, "you allege was no accident. I allege it was set to burn the very evidence now before this bench, sir, and I have a witness to swear to a lantern carried from that counting-house an hour before the flames were cried. Sarah Pratt, brought at Julian's own expense and no small persuasion, rose from the gallery and swore her account in a voice that shook only at the start and steadied by its end, and the murmur in the room rose to something nearer a roar before Sir Robert's gavel brought it low again. It was Davy Comb's testimony that broke what remained of Rook's composure entirely. Called forward, sweating, his hand going to scratch behind his ear before he had spoken 3 words, he confessed the false measures, the £2 paid for silence, 2 years of small reports carried quietly to Rook from the Hall's own stables, and when Sir Robert asked him, in that flat, unhurried voice, precisely who had instructed him to swear the excise warrant false, Davy Combe looked once at Hester, once at the floor, and said, "Mr. Edmund Rook, sir. May God forgive me for the saying of it," and the room went utterly silent. Sir Robert turned, at the last, to the letters, and read aloud Rook's own words to Mr. Prewitt, instructing the purchase of the Stag and Lantern the moment its licence lapsed, at a price he himself called, in his own hand, criminally low, before the turnpike route's confirmation trebled its worth. It was Rook's own pen that hanged him in that room, exactly as her father had always said it would. When Sir Robert at last turned to Edmund Rook and asked what he had to say for himself, the gentleman who had never once needed to raise his voice found, for the first time in Hester's hearing, that his voice had entirely deserted him. He stood a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, his hand went to his waistcoat pocket and drew out a small worn locket, and he opened it and looked at it rather than at the bench, and said, so quietly the whole room had to lean to hear it, that his mother had died in a debtor's lodging when he was 9 years old, and that he had sworn over her grave never to be poor again, and that he supposed, in the end, he had kept his oath by breaking every other one worth keeping. It was not an excuse. He did not offer it as one. But something in the room's fury softened, all the same, into something nearer sorrow, and Hester, watching him, found she believed him entirely, and pitied him besides, and understood that both things could be true together, without excusing him of a farthing owed. Sir Robert Aldous let the silence hold a long moment before he spoke again, and when he did, it was to Julian directly, as the estate's own head, and the party most wronged in law, if not in grief. "The bench will confirm Miss Quill's licence without further inquiry," he said, her house and her father's name, both fully cleared of every charge laid against them. As to Mr. Rook, the matter of theft from the estate is, properly, yours to pursue or to forgive as you see fit, my lord, the estate being the injured party in law. The matter of the fire, and of a man's death by it, is graver, and not so easily set aside. Every eye in the room turned to Julian, who stood a long moment with his hand resting, Hester noticed, on the back of the bench rail exactly where hers had rested 3 days before, and when he spoke his voice was steady in the particular way of a man who has decided something and does not mean to be moved from it. "I will not see my cousin hanged, nor tried for murder on the word of a fire 5 years cold, when no man now living can swear beyond doubt whether it was set, or whether it caught by chance from a dropped lantern in careless flight," he said. "I will say only this, that Edmund Rook will resign every office, and trust he holds under this family before sundown, that he will make full restitution of every pound this ledger proves diverted, so far as his means allow, and that he will remove himself from this county within the month, to wherever he chooses, with an allowance sufficient to keep him from want, but no farthing more, paid quarterly and reviewed each year. I do this not for his sake, but because I find I would rather protect my tenants, and my name, and the memory of an honest man wrongly buried under a thief's shame, than spend the county's mercy on a public hanging that would mend nothing, and unmake no part of what has already been lost." It was, the room seemed to understand all at once, exactly the right shape of justice, not soft, not cruel, but precisely weighed, like a good accountant's final column, and a murmur of something like approval, even respect, ran the length of the market hall. Edmund Rook, hearing his sentence, did not protest it. He closed the locket in his hand, bowed once, with something of his old immaculate courtesy returning to him even in ruin, and said only to Hester, in a voice gone entirely without its former gentleness, or its former menace both, "Your father would be proud of you, Miss Quill. I find that troubles me a great deal more than the ruin does." Then he was gone from the hall, and gone, within the fortnight, from the county entirely, and the crowd that had come to watch a poor relation ruined a second time went home instead to argue, over ale at the very inn that had occasioned the whole affair, about whether they had just watched the fairest justice Fenbridge had seen in a generation. Miss Arabella Finch, who had been brought to the sessions by Julian's aunt in the standing hope of a match long since abandoned, in all but name, found Hester in the crush outside the market hall, and surprised her entirely by taking both her hands. "I never wanted him, you know," Arabella said, low and honest, nodding toward Julian across the yard. "His aunt wanted it a great deal more than either of us did. I am glad, truly, that it will be you. You have earned him in a way I never troubled to try." She went on, within the year, to marry a naval lieutenant of good humour and no fortune at all, and wrote to Hester twice yearly ever after, letters full of easy, unguarded happiness that owed nothing to anyone's arithmetic but her own. Sir Robert Aldous, gathering his papers as the hall emptied, paused only to say to Julian, in the dry manner of a man who has seen a great deal of the county's business, and rarely finds cause for real admiration, that he did not often close a sessions believing the world had been made measurably fairer by the morning's work, but that he believed it today, and wished them both good fortune, and went home to his dinner as though he had not just settled the shape of two people's whole remaining lives. The offer, when Julian finally made it, was not made in the hall's great hall, where the deed had once struck the flagstones, nor in the crowded market room where the ledger had been read aloud, but in the Stag and Lantern's own tap room, 3 evenings later, once the excitement of quarter sessions had settled into the ordinary, blessed business of a full house needing feeding. He found her at the counting table, going over the day's honest, unremarkable takings by candlelight, and stood a moment in the doorway before she noticed him, watching her with an expression she had never once seen him wear in 5 years of careful distance. "I owe you an apology so large I have not yet found the words to fit it," he said. "I have spent 3 days trying, and I find every version sounds smaller than the thing itself. You need not apologize again, my lord. The bench has already settled the account, not that account. This one is mine alone to settle, and it has nothing to do with ledgers." He came further into the room, and she saw that his hands, usually so still, were not quite steady, and that he had brought nothing with him this time, no deed, no paper, no proof of anything at all, only himself. "I told you once that giving you this ruin would cost you everything, and cost me nothing to lose," he said. "I have thought of little else these 3 days but how entirely I was wrong. It has cost me everything, Hester, watching you make of this house exactly what you are, steady and honest, and entirely too competent to need rescuing by any man, least of all by one who once threw your worth at your feet like a coin he was glad to be rid of. I am not here to offer you anything you need. You have proved, past any doubt, that you need nothing from me at all. Then why are you here, my lord?" "Because I find I want you regardless of what you need," he said, "which is, I am told, the only honest reason a man ought ever to ask a woman to marry him. Not to save you, not to settle any debt between our 2 names, only because I have watched you 5 years, and loved you for at least 3 of them, without once admitting it to myself, and I would like, very much, to spend the rest of my life earning the right to say so." Outside, faint over the crossroads fields in the last of the light, a lapwing cried its thin falling note, the same sound that had followed her the day the deed struck the flagstones, and Hester found she was smiling before she had decided to. "You once said it would cost you nothing to lose me," she said. "Say the truer version, and I will consider your offer." "It will cost me everything," Julian said, "and I would spend it again, gladly, every single day, if you would only let me." She set down her pen at last, and squared the day's ledger neat upon the table, and said yes in a voice steadier than she had thought she owned, and Mrs. Yarrow, who had been listening quite unashamedly from the kitchen doorway the entire time, wept into her apron and pronounced it, through the tears, the best evening's business the house had done yet. They were married in October in the small stone church at Fembridge, quietly, by contrast with every public spectacle the summer had cost them, with no more than 40 guests and a wedding breakfast laid in the Stag and Lantern's own tap room, scrubbed and hung with the last of the season's asters. Mrs. Yarrow wept through the whole of the ceremony, and denied it fiercely the moment it ended, and was given, by the new Countess of Marrow's own insistence, the deed to a cottage of her own at the crossroads, rent-free for life, which she accepted only after being assured 3 times it was not charity, but wages long overdue. Davy Combe was kept on as head ostler, his 6 children fed, and his wife's chest eased by a physician, the estate now quietly paid for, and he never again. In all the years the Stag and Lantern stood, scratched behind his ear for any reason but an honest itch. Mr. Josiah Pruitt lost his licence to practice, and removed to London in some disgrace, though not, Hester noted without much satisfaction, in any poverty he had not richly earned. Edmund Rooke wrote once, the following spring, from a small lodging in Bristol, a short, unadorned letter enclosing the first instalment of restitution he had managed to save from honest clerking work, and closing only with the words that he hoped, in time, to deserve a kinder account of himself than the one the county now kept. And Julian, reading it, said nothing, but did not burn it either, and filed it instead in a drawer, where old debts, once paid, are kept as record rather than as grudge. The turnpike route was confirmed that same spring exactly as the Trust's quiet minutes had promised, running directly past the Stag and Lantern's door, and by the following summer the house Julian had once called worthless was, by common agreement, the length of the road from Fembridge to the county town. The busiest and best-loved coaching stop for 20 miles in either direction, its tap-room full most nights, its stable never once again standing empty, its sign repainted, Stag and Lantern both bright and true beneath a coat of good varnish that Hester had mixed herself. It was there, almost a year to the day after the deed had first struck the flagstones at her feet, that Julian found her again one evening at the door of the house, watching the last carts roll in off the darkening road, a lamp freshly lit and hung in the window behind her, and lapwings, as ever, crying their thin falling note over the crossroads fields beyond. He came and stood beside her without a word, and took her hand, and for a long moment they simply watched the light spill warm and gold across the yard, falling on strangers who would, within the hour, be strangers no longer, but guests fed and housed and sent on their way the richer for having stopped. A lamp lit in a window that expects no one, Hester said softly, remembering the first ruined evening she had stood in this same doorway, with nothing but a tally stick and a stranger's grudging deed to her name. It expects everyone now, Julian said, and drew her hand through his arm, and together they went in out of the last of the light to see the house fed, the accounts kept honest, and the long, well-earned business of their happiness quietly, carefully, faithfully begun. If this story warmed you, if you found yourself hoping, right alongside her, that the hand holding the pen would finally be an honest one, then come sit a while longer by this fire before you go. I keep a chair here for anyone who loves a slow-won happiness better than an easy one, a kettle always near the boil, and a lamp that, like Hester's, never much minds who it's lit for. Tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you longest, the deed striking the flagstones, the lapwing crying over the crossroads, or that quiet locket opened at last in a crowded room. If you'd like more evenings like this one, stay close and subscribe, and keep your place warm by the hearth for the next story. Until then, be steady with your own accounts, be gentle with the ones still learning to trust you, and sleep well, with your own lamp lit for whoever finds their way home.